Hi. So this time I'm at a very special place. Right now I'm sitting at what is known as the John Lennon Room. It's a beautiful room and this is part of the Pepper Tree Resort, which is in Ojai Valley, California. And this entire resort is part of the property of the Krishnamurti Foundation of America in Ojai. In fact, the library and everything are right across, just a very short walk away within the same property. I'm getting to stay here in this beautiful place. This is a beautiful room. There's a beautiful balcony outside and I love this beautiful picture window and this writing desk here. I have no idea how many people before me have sat here. I also don't know how many people actually visited this place in whatever was the original version when Krishnamurti used to stay here. And by the way, this has been named John Lennon Room, not because John Lennon stayed here, but because he was one of the many famous people who visited Krishnamurti many number of times while Krishnamurti used to stay here. And there were many other people who visited with him, including Charlie Chaplin and a whole lot of other people. And there are rooms available in their names too. But I am staying in this beautiful room and I'm inspired to do an audio narration from this book. This is an unpublished commentary. This is called Reflecting Consciousness. It's an overview of dialogue by Javier Gómez Rodríguez. So I hope I pronounced that correctly. Pardon me if I did not. And I'm going to be reading it right here for you all to be able to listen to it at this beautiful desk. And this window overlooks the grounds outside at the Pepper Tree Resort, the beautiful orange groves and the beautiful trees. And it's very tranquil. It's very peaceful and I love sitting here, and I'm going to be starting the reading right now. Reflecting Consciousness, an overview of dialogue by Javier Gómez Rodríguez. Humanity is in a condition of public war, of every man against every man, and private war of each man with himself. Plato, The Laws, Book 1. Introduction. Even as a young boy, I became aware that many of our human problems had a lot to do with our difficulties in communication. Communication was essential not only to prevent and dissolve the inevitable misunderstandings and to bring about the needful social cooperation, but also to establish right relationship among people. Such communication was not only a useful tool to bring about order in the outer dimension, but it was just as important in terms of maintaining a quality of inward sanity. The pervasive factors of authority and its coercive social pressures became internalized and led to the establishment of a similar inner hierarchical system in the field of consciousness. And just as in a relationship, authority was a denial of intelligence, sensitivity, and love, so was it inwardly a source of division and conflict. The resulting general state of fragmentation not only left one with the feeling that it was impossible to talk openly and rationally with other people, but that one's own mind and heart were riddled with contradictions that undermined one's integrity as a human being. Given such a state of affairs, it is no wonder that some of us would then set out on a lifelong search for meaning. This fundamental quest took me to the Krishnamurti Educational Centre at the Brockwood Park. There I landed, aged 17, in August 1975. I attended the gatherings and then the school year began. Kay held a series of weekly meetings with the whole school, and there was also a discussion with David Bohm, who came down every weekend from London, where he was professor of theoretical physics at Birkbeck College. Kay and Bohm had met in 1961, which resulted in a close collaboration, including the founding of the school in 1969, and a series of astonishing and wide-ranging conversations concerning the nature of consciousness and the transformation of man. Listening to them, I pictured Kay as a man of truth, and Bohm as a man of clear thinking, united in their common concern with wholeness. For Bohm, Modern physics pointed to the sense of totality as the ground of being, a ground that defies knowing. K kept pointing to the unknown as that same ground. So the two men seemed to meet at that invisible border between science, which means knowledge, and the unknown, and the bridge between them was called insight. Communication was central to the whole endeavor. Kay was constantly talking about the basic arts of seeing, listening, questioning, and learning. He pictured his talks as a conversation between two friends, which is what he understood by the word dialogue. He imagined these two friends sitting on a bench in a park under the dappled light, talking about their lives. He would then point out the factors that interfere with communication, such as prejudices, opinions, beliefs, and ideologies. These introduce an element of resistance and duality, whereas communication, as he defined it, is being on the same level with the same intensity at the same time. For him, such communication was love, the essence of relationship and the key to the transformation of consciousness. For Bohm, dialogue implied the sharing of meaning. Whether there is sharing or not is the key to communication, which takes place when the meaning becomes common to those participating in the exchange. He would indicate that one of the meanings of meaning is intention or purpose, as in, I mean to do this. Another is value, as in, that means a lot to me. And still a third is significance. Meaning signifies, that is, points to something as being so. And this pointing is done on the basis of relevance or value, which is the guide of our purposes, which implies that we are, at heart, creatures of meaning, that for us, meaning is being. The question then is whether the meaning is coherent, that is, holds together, or doesn't. The awareness of the coherence or incoherence of meaning is a fundamental aspect of the awakening of intelligence and compassion, of freedom and wholeness. In the 80s, Bohm developed his dialogue proposal into a comprehensive approach to the transformation of consciousness. This proposal was very much in the air when I returned to Brockwood as a teacher in 1990. Kay had died in February 1986, but Bohm was still alive. Various dialogue groups had been set up worldwide to experiment with Bohm's proposal. The Bohm Ojai seminar group produced a number of publications outlining the whole process. Some of us among the staff took a great interest in it and worked directly with Bohm whenever he could make it down from London. These meetings with Bohm were especially illuminating and intense, and they were instrumental in awakening the quality of insight. Unfortunately, Bohm passed away of a heart attack on 27 October 1992, which frustrated my intention of working more closely with him in the unfolding of the potential of this approach to dialogue. In 1993, I left Brockwood to join the resident scholar program of KFI at the headquarters in Vasant Vihar, Chennai. I spent nearly 2 years there, studying K's teachings and taking stock of my own life. It was an unforgettably contemplative and joyful period of my life, for which I'll always be grateful to all those who made it possible. On returning to my native area of Spain in 1995, I was instrumental in setting up and facilitating a K-inspired inquiry group. My approach gradually structured itself on the basis of what I call the 3 pillars of dialogue. 1. The theme was our lives, and we were meeting to talk about them as human beings. 2. The format of our exchanges was based on David Bohm's dialogue proposal, that is, on a sharing of meaning without a controlling authority or a predetermined end, with our sights on self-knowledge and the universality of human experience. 3. K's teachings as a sounding board of our questions and discoveries, and as a deep mirror of the human condition and its potential and necessary transformation. This experiment went on for 4 years. One key discovery, which I came to identify as the 4th pillar, was the quality of heightened sensitivity that emerges out of the participatory process of dialogue. When we listen, so that we hold all the views and opinions together without judgment, a sense of undivided awareness develops that makes for harmony, clarity, and insight. Such sensitivity enables the emergence of the deeper layers of one's conditioning, something indispensable in the process of inner liberation, which this experiment is ultimately about. For me, this quality of sharing the content and significance of our life was the true foundation of a new form of communication, of a communion that became the heart of a deeply human friendship, and that outward harmony affected the inner most profoundly, so that the inner and the outer moved in tandem within the same field of deepening awareness. So for me, this was a veritable demonstration of the transformative potential of case teachings and Bohm's dialogical approach to self-knowledge. It is out of this sense of the inherent value of dialogue that, drawing on Bohm, Kay, and my own experience and understanding, I ventured to put together this general overview of the process. It is an attempt at conveying an approximate sense of the nature, scope, and implications of this experimental approach to the transformation of consciousness and the creation of a new, wholesome, and truly universal culture. It seems to me that, given the enduring and increasingly dangerous trait of fragmentation and destructiveness afflicting mankind, this proposal remains, if anything, more relevant and urgent than ever. General context and need for dialogue. The constellation of challenges currently facing humanity indicates a pervasive and sustained state of incoherence and fragmentation, requiring a deeply serious commitment to finding a peaceful and sustainable resolution. As these challenges are of a global nature, the traditional divisions of nationality, class, race, belief, and ideology are obvious impediments to the total cooperation that is required to meet them adequately. The fact is that we are all in the same boat and that our separate interests and identities are a central contributing factor to the widespread and mounting disorder and violence in the world. Questioning the fundamental and unexamined assumptions which govern our thinking and values is therefore a central aspect of the transformation we need to create an atmosphere of mutual understanding and cooperation, without which we cannot hope to solve any of these problems. One of the first difficulties in trying to deal with this constellation of challenges is communication. Everyone has different opinions and basic assumptions about the nature of the problems, the principles to be applied, and every other kind of important and trivial aspect. The tendency is to interpret the information in terms of our opinions, conclusions, and beliefs. We are so identified with these things that we invest them with the quality of our living self-interest. When contradicted or challenged, as they invariably are, these assumptions are defended with an emotional charge, the intensity of which can result in conflict, polarization, and hate. Such opinionated attitudes are irrational, and they prevent the kind of considerate and attentive listening without which communication is wholly inadequate. This deficient communication is the inevitable outcome of our listening to the screen of prejudice, desire, and fear. We cannot listen or communicate integrally because we are constantly projecting from this background and its conflicting patterns of self-interest. Communication implies thinking, sharing, and creating together. This requires that one be seriously involved. Communication is not only verbal but implies communing non-verbally with each other, which is to be at the same level, at the same time, with the same intensity. When we share then, what we share then is not just words, but the perception of meaning, of its coherence or incoherence, partiality or completeness, truth or falsehood. This perception requires that we be able to follow the swift movement of what is under examination. This pliability is denied by prejudice and identification, which are static. Real communication or communion takes place when there is a receptive quality of mind and heart. Then there is compassionate understanding and the spontaneous action of cooperation, without which we can never hope to meet the global challenges facing humanity. We don't seem to realize that our life is the life of the rest of mankind, that we have made this violent world without conflicting desires, ambitions, greed, and envy. We are the result of the fragmented process of culture, inwardly broken up and outwardly in conflict. So we are not separate individuals. As Krishnamurti never tired of saying, we are the world and the world is us. To see that is to awaken to our full responsibility for what the world is, so that to change the world means changing ourselves. As each one of us is the whole of humanity, our personal problems are like those of the rest of the world. That is why it is natural and important to spend time together investigating our human problems hesitantly, without pretense, without imposing our opinions on each other. We mean to establish a relationship among us, which implies knowing our mutual interests, how deep they are, and what energy we have to resolve our major issues in life. Such a dialogue is both an exchange of feelings, ideas, and opinions, as well as of our problems in order to understand and resolve them. We must be free to express whatever we want and to listen with the intention to expose and inquire into ourselves and the challenges we face as human beings. We have so many problems, we have hardly any time to listen to those of another. If we want to open our hearts and unburden our minds, we have to resort either to the confessional or the analyst's couch, paying for it in coin or belief. We can also try holding a monologue with ourselves, but such introspective talk tends to be emotionally self-enclosing, whereas it is important to open one's heart. To be open is to be sensitive to the whole movement within and about us. To communicate in this open and sensitive way, there must be a quality of freedom, patience, and a deep urge to understand. It is not a matter of giving ourselves pat, comforting, or plausible solutions, but of sustaining a quality of observation and probing that allows the question to reveal its own implicit answer. Questioning is a great art. It is important to ask questions of others and of ourselves, to inquire together affably, hesitantly, with a quality of intelligent sensitivity and mutual concern. It is important to ask not just any question, but the kind of vital and fundamental questions which are rooted in a wide awareness of the whole field of existence. We need to ask fundamental questions and not be satisfied with explanations, for they concern the very meaning and quality of our lives. These questions spring from and are directed at the unfolding understanding of ourselves in relationship with people, things, and ideas, and therefore each one of us is responsible for finding the answer. The important thing to do, to discover, and after discovering, to die to what has been discovered, and moving on like a river. Outlining dialogue. Dialogue comes from the Greek dialogos, where logos means the word or the meaning of the word, and dia means through, not to. This definition suggests a stream of meaning flowing among the participants. This shared meaning is the cultural glue that holds people and societies together. This meaning of dialogue is to be contrasted with that of such terms as discussion, negotiation, and debate. Discussion means to break things up, and it's like a ping-pong game whose object is to win. A lot of what passes for dialogue is a form of negotiation. In negotiation, People trade minor points but don't question the more fundamental factors of confrontation, such as nationalism, religion, and ideology. Dialogue is also not a debate, which comes from a Latin root meaning to battle over. In dialogue, we are not trying to hold on to our assumptions, break things up, and win any battle over the pieces. There is no attempt to convince or persuade, which means to win over by forceful or suave means. Dialogue is participatory process in the generation of common meaning, understanding, and cooperation. From this shared meaning, a common mind arises that does not suppress the individual. Everybody is quite free. It's not like a mob where the collective mind takes over. It's something between the individual and the collective, a harmony between them in which the whole constantly moves towards coherence. The separate opinions are seen not to matter very much, and so we begin to move beyond them into something new and creative. As indicated, words are central to dialogue, where they function as the reflection of the stream of consciousness, shaping our personalities and informing our existence. Words encapsulate not only the specific semantic meanings necessary to communicate, but also the whole historical record and value system on which a given society or culture is based. Language becomes a major factor conditioning on collective and individual outlook on life. The word is the concept, the image, the symbol, and emotional content that constitute the substance of thought. This network of thought determines our attitudes and reactions, our pleasures, fears, and desires, our very notions of ourselves. Our use of words is a reflection of our whole background of knowledge, experience, thought, and feeling. They are not mere abstractions, but constitute the substantive content of consciousness informing our lives. It is important, therefore, to pay close attention to our use of words, whether we speak coherently or incoherently, carelessly or with precision and understanding, whether we are sensitive to the beauty of words, their logic and descriptive power, whether we identify with and are driven by words or are free from their compulsive associations, whether we live on words or are able to transcend their virtual reality. One thing to bear in mind, as Krishnamurti used to point out, is that the word is not the thing, that it is a symbol and not the real. Words are useful pointers, indicators, and what matters is to see past them to what they are pointing to. The word is a danger when it usurps the place of reality and truth. Being aware of the movement of word, symbol, and image, the conceptual and emotional content is therefore a key factor in freeing ourselves from the destructive patterns of conditioning. As we said, the object of dialogue is not to analyze things, to win an argument, or merely to exchange opinions. Rather, it is to listen to everybody's opinions and points of views, to suspend them, and to see what they all mean. Opinions are assumptions, postulates, hypotheses, speculations, conclusions, etc., that may or may not be valid or relevant. We are looking at and appreciating the meaning of everything together so that we share the same content. This makes for a participatory consciousness, as consciousness always is, but one that is experienced as such. When each is sharing the whole meaning of the group, we can call that a true dialogue. Such dialogue is becoming increasingly urgent in a world that is deeply fragmented, whose entrenched divisions represent a total threat to life on earth, and whose profoundly alienating effect on communities and individuals alike makes for an increasingly meaningless existence. Such a pervasive breakdown in communication destroys the delicate fabric not only of society and human relationships, but of consciousness itself. Such a state perpetuates an atmosphere of general mistrust, antagonism, and violence. So at the heart of this approach to dialogue and communication lies a deep and abiding ethical concern with wholeness and freedom. Thought. Dialogue is aimed at going into the whole process of thought, because it is in thought that fragmentation is displayed and has its source. Historically, we have engaged in thought, but we have only paid attention to the content, not to the process. However, everything requires attention. If we ran machines without paying attention to them, they would eventually break down. Our thought is also processed and it requires attention. Otherwise, it's going to malfunction, as in fact it has been doing for a very long time. Our misunderstanding of the nature, structure, and operation of thought is one of the fundamental causes of the widespread disorder in our lives and in the world. One of the basic things we do not seem to understand is that thought is essentially the active response of memory. If we examine it, we see that, as Bohm indicated, thought is a collection of concepts, memories, and reflexes colored by personal needs, fears, and desires, all of which are limited and distorted by the boundaries of our language, history, and culture. Our different concepts and opinions are the result of past thought, of what others have said. They are all programmed into the memory and react in a reflex manner. We tend to defend our opinions because we are identified with them. They are intimately bound up with our sense of security, happiness, and self-worth. So we feel under attack when they are questioned. We experience such opinions as truths when they are just historical assumptions derived from the cultural tradition and sustained by the prevalent social discourse. Thoughts tend to divide, to fragment things. Every division we make is the result of the way we think. We separate things for convenience and then we give the separation great importance. Some of these results of thought, such as nations and religions, are considered to be so important that they override almost everything else. When something has such high collective value, there is a need to maintain it at all costs, and everyone is pressured into conformity, which interferes with sensitivity and freedom of thought. Any questioning of such valuable assumptions must be suppressed. This engenders a pervasive state of self-deception involving a distortion of perception or illusion, thought, feeling, delusion, and collective consciousness and action, collusion. This collective false play is its own recipe for disaster. Another difficulty with thought is that it's apparently unaware of its deep participation in the construction of reality. Almost everything around us has been determined by thought. The whole ecological crisis, for example, is due to our thinking that nature exists for our use. Even if we solve the ecological issue, if we keep on thinking that the world is there for us to exploit, then that's what we are going to do and the problem will manifest in some other way. And if we bring the same mentality to bear on the development of robotics, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering, people will be employing such advanced technologies arbitrarily for whatever suits their fancy, which in the current state of generalized ignorance and fragmentation can only add to the mounting wave of destruction. The thing that has gone wrong with thought is that it does things and then it says it has not done them, that they took place independently and so they constitute an objective problem to be resolved. The problem is insoluble as long as thoughts keep producing it, so that the only thing to stop thinking that way. Thought has to be aware of its consequences and currently it is not sufficiently aware. This lack of self-awareness of thought ties up with what in neurophysiology is called proprioception. Proprioception is the body's ability to perceive its own movements, what comes from it, and what from outside. Without that capacity, the body is not viable. The same applies to thought. For example, because we are aware of the intention that gives rise to thought, thought appears as if out of nowhere. This gives the wrong meaning concerning the nature of thought, which has its source in memory. This lack of proprioception of thought is at the root of our human problems. We need mirrors to facilitate proprioception so that we can see the origin, operation, and results of our thinking. The body itself acts as a mirror of the sensations produced by thought. Our relationship with other people is another such mirror. Suspending our reactions also provides an inner mirror in which we can see the operation of thought. Thought is constantly making problems and then trying to solve them without noticing that it is creating them. And the more it tries to solve them, the more problems it creates. If the body operated this way, it would not last long. And our civilization might not last all that long either if our culture carries on like this. If you bring a sustained quality of attention to bear on this process of self-deception, a new kind of proprioceptive thought may arise that does not get into such vicious circles. So this is another way in which dialogue can contribute to bring about a different kind of consciousness, culture, and society. Suspension is an important feature to bear in mind in this process of observation and learning. Suspension does not mean suppression, but the expression of whatever reaction arises to the extent necessary for its observation, both inwardly by the individual and outwardly by the group, which then acts as a mirror. Assumptions will come up and react to each other. If we all suspend our reactions this way, we can look at them and see what they mean. The aim is for us to see what is on each other's minds without conclusions or judgments, which makes for an increasing awareness of nature and movement of thought and emotion. We can then notice that this same process is common to everyone, that we are all in the same boat. Thought is individual and collective. As individuals, we can think various things, but most of it comes from the collective background, from society. So we need to pay attention to thought both individually and collectively. All of this is part of thinking together, sharing our views without hostility, which we can't do when we are identified with and defend our opinions. Thinking together involves people taking up each other's ideas, developing and adding to them, instead of falling into the usual argumentative pattern of conviction and persuasion. Certain kinds of thoughts play a more important role than other kinds. One of these is a thought of necessity. What is necessary cannot be otherwise. The word has a Latin root meaning not to yield. Necessity thus generates powerful and unyielding impulses. People will go against the instinct of self-preservation if they feel something is absolutely necessary. All major disputes are about different views of what is absolutely necessary. In such a clash of absolute necessities, powerful emotional charges and feelings of frustration, anger, and hate are built up. Such conflicts cannot be resolved unless those involved abandon or suspend these notions of absolute necessity. We must be able to observe and think together to understand ourselves and transform the world. Thought, the capacity to think, is common to all human beings. We may think differently according to our background, but we are all caught in the network of conditioned thought. Freedom from conditioning with its self-interest and identification is the essence of thinking together. Thinking together is not being of one mind about a particular point of view, but looking at the whole without division and judgment. If one is attached to one's opinions, prejudices, and beliefs, then there is division and conflict. So to think together ultimately implies suspending or dissolving one's identity. We are facing a tremendous crisis and we need to understand the consciousness that has brought it about. The psychological problem of self-centeredness is far more essential than any external issues whatsoever, be it political, social, economic, ecological, etc., for these are its results. The point is that the inner invariably ends up overcoming the outer. The outer organization, however necessary, is eventually shattered by our physiological desires, fears, and anxieties. The turning point, the key to the transformation of the world, lies in the understanding of our consciousness, in not contributing physiologically to the destructiveness of humanity. If we can do that, then we will not only be the masters of ourselves, but we will have changed the world. Engaging with dialogue. In experimenting with this dialogue proposal, size matters. If the group is too small, people tend to accommodate and avoid upsetting each other. When the number is raised to about 20, people cannot avoid controversial issues and politeness falls away pretty soon. 40 is about as many as can be conveniently seated in one or two circles. A group of 20 to 40 people also constitutes a microcosm of the whole society. There are enough people representing its different subcultures, and the question of culture, of shared meaning, emerges in a tangible way. That's crucial because the collectively shared meaning, the collective thought, tends to dominate the individual. Language and thought are mostly collective, and that's therefore something that a group of this size can address. People sit in a circle because such an arrangement doesn't favor anybody and allows for direct communication among the participants. In principle, it should work without any leader, agenda, or purpose. It may be useful to have a facilitator to get the whole group going, to keep a watch on it for a while and explain what's happening from time to time. But his function is to work himself out of a job that, however, may take time. As the group meets regularly and all sorts of issues are faced, people will begin to depend less and less on the facilitator. At least, that's the idea. The whole of society has been organized to think that we cannot do without controlling authority. But maybe we can. Of course, this is an experiment and the outcome cannot be guaranteed. While there are no rules for dialogue, we may learn certain principles as we go along, such as that we have to give space for each one to speak. It's not a rule, but something we see as necessary. Some people tend to dominate while others are verbally inhibited or afraid to make fools of themselves. There are all kinds of roles that people play and that interfere with the dialogue process. There's a pressure to get in there quickly, and the slow ones feel left out, and the communication can break down for this very elementary reason. Space needs to be given to provide an opportunity for everyone to participate. At the same time, you cannot take time to mull the issue over, for by then the conversation has moved on. So we need to develop a quality of attention that permits us to follow the swift movement of the conversation, as well as providing sufficient space for everyone to intervene. In the overall culture, there are vast numbers of subsets of opinions, assumptions, and beliefs. These subcultures differ from one another according to race, class, religion, profession, political ideology, etc. The participants may not realize that they hold different opinions due to their respective subcultures, but they'll tend to defend them, often unconsciously. That seems to be the most natural thing in the world, but we cannot organize a good society on that basis. That's the way democracy is supposed to work, but it doesn't. It's become a struggle of opinions in which the strongest prevails. We cannot have a dialogue that way. If each one had different opinion, we would find it difficult to work together. But this is what is actually happening in all sorts of areas of human endeavor. In large corporations, the top executives have different opinions, cannot get together. The company does not work efficiently, loses money, and goes under. We can all see what is happening in politics. Religious people would be the hardest to get together, as the basic assumptions are so firmly entrenched that once they split, even within the same denominations, example Protestants and Catholics in Christianity, they cannot get back together. Scientists also get into the same situation, each one holding to a different version of the truth. This would indicate that people's assumptions and compulsive self-interest end up overriding and contradicting their best intentions. Everything can enter into the dialogue. But it might take a while before people start sharing personal issues. The group is not expressly aimed at therapeutic resolution of individual problems, but the personal is intimately connected with the collective and cultural. So, it is a natural part of the content of the dialogue process. Many of our basic assumptions, for example, have their origin in our earliest childhood experiences. However, people are not likely to confide in each other at first. If they see the importance of dialogue, however, they will work at it and begin to know and trust each other. Any group like this is a microcosm of the society with all its problems, and that's what we have to work with. Initially, the group may tend to talk about trivial and superficial matters, but gradually people gain in confidence and venture to inquire into more personal as well as fundamental issues affecting their lives. In dialogue, we are not going to have any agenda. We're not going to decide on any issue or accomplish any useful thing. What dialogue proposes is an open, empty, and free space. That's the meaning of the word leisure, an unoccupied, empty space where we can learn. Anything may come into the space, which is then emptied once we have finished. We're not trying to accumulate anything. We have no fixed or absolute purpose. We may set up relative purposes for investigation, but we are not wedded to any particular purpose. Our purpose, if we can call it that, is to communicate honestly and coherently in truth. Our ordinary thought in society is incoherent, scattered in all directions and not in phase. But if we were to think together in a coherent way, it could have a tremendous power. This coherence would not only at the explicit but also at the tacit level. Tacit means that which is unspoken, which cannot be described, like the knowledge required to ride a bicycle. Thought is such a subtle tacit process. The meaning is basically tacit. What we can say explicitly is only a small part of it. Thought emerges from the tacit ground of knowledge, and any fundamental change in thought will have to come from the tacit ground. People will experience such a change if we are able to sustain this kind of dialogue. They will behave differently even outside the dialogue, and that could become the seed of a significant socio-cultural transformation. The thing is that we cannot tell where and how such a seed might fall and germinate. So we should not be surprised if some of these dialogue groups don't manage to sustain themselves. The point is not to establish a fixed dialogue group forever, but one that lasts long enough to make a difference. If it goes on for too long, it might get caught up in its own habits. But it has to be kept going for a while, meeting on a regular basis, or it won't work. If we stick with it, the deep assumptions and the emotional charges will surface and clash, giving rise to frustration and a feeling that it's not worth it. Given the nature of the process, this is to be expected. This dialogue proposal is something new and it has to be explored for a while. We are likely to go through a period in which nothing seems to be happening, that our exploration is not getting us anywhere. So dialogue is not always going to be entertaining or satisfying, nor is it intended to accomplish anything tangibly useful. So people might tend to drop it. When we feel that something is necessary, we do it, no matter how frustrating or difficult it might seem. And by now it should be clear that it is not necessary to share meaning. That it is necessary to share meaning, for that is the essence of culture, without which society cannot hold together. But if people don't see this necessity or agree that this dialogue proposal is the way to go about it, then there is no reason to take part in it. So it's natural that as a group goes on, some people leave and some others come in. It's not for everybody all the time. There could be, in fact, a constantly renewing set of people taking part in this experiment. Dialogue is an art. The word art has a root meaning, to fit. So it implies a harmonious quality of creative order. If an artist would put paint arbitrarily on canvas, there would be nothing to it. If he imitated someone else's style, he'd be mediocre. He's got to create his own quality of necessary order. The parts of the composition must have an inner necessity that makes them cohere in a whole, or else it does not have much value. This artistic necessity is creative. The artist has his freedom in this creative act. Freedom makes possible a creative perception of new orders of necessity. Freedom is not doing what we like. What we like is often determined by a conditioned reflex pattern of thought. It is the awareness and suspension of these reflex patterns that makes for the quality of sensitivity at the heart of creative freedom. This is an essential aspect of the unfolding creative potential of the art of dialogue. The vision of dialogue. There will be frustration, friction, and disappointment in dialogue. But if we can manage to stay with all that, we will discover a new depth of friendship. We're not aiming for or demanding friendship or affection. We don't demand anything. We are just staying with all our knowledge, thoughts, emotions, and reactions together. We are participating and talking and taking part in the whole stream of consciousness. That is the vision of dialogue. Let's suppose we stick with it and face the irritation, frustration, and emotional charge. We will then begin to see that the fundamental level in people is the same and the superficial differentials are not that significant. A deeper contact at the more universal level emerges in the group. This level of contact produces the sense of being one body and one mind. We have one mind because the whole group holds all the opinions, assumptions, and emotions together. There is no pressure to agree or disagree, to reject or justify. So the group does not overwhelm the individual, nor does the individual impose himself on the group. This close relationship establishes a bond of impersonal fellowship. It is impersonal in the sense that we don't have to know each other intimately for it to emerge. People find this sense of impersonal friendship missing in our society, which glorifies the separate individual. This is an important reason for dialogue, as it concerns one of the pervasive sources of collective unhappiness, namely, the general alienation of the individual in society. This reason alone should be strong enough to get us through all the frustrations we are likely to encounter. We have to share the consciousness that we actually have, not some imaginary new consciousness we might be trying to achieve. We are facing facts, not dealing in ideals and beliefs. If we can share and stay with what we are, then we have a common consciousness. If we could stay with anything, violence, anger, power, hate to the end, then it would collapse because we would see that ultimately we are all the same, which would lead to participation and fellowship. We are not imposing opinions about what to be or not to be on the group. The sharing of consciousness is more important than the content of the opinions. Opinions are limited anyway and intrinsically uncertain. Truth does not emerge from opinions, but from a freer movement of the tacit mind. We have to get meaning coherent if we are going to perceive or to take part in truth. Dialogue works on the coherence of meaning, which affects the tacit level of consciousness, where the most significant things take place. If we do something creative at that level, it may communicate itself with words and beyond them, potentially becoming the seed of a new culture. That is why dialogue is so important. Dialogue, unlike science and religion, is not aiming at a unique and exclusive truth or assume that thought can know everything or grasp the absolute. There is no way thought can get hold of the whole, because it only abstracts, limits, and defines. Thought is the response of memory, and the past it draws on is necessarily limited. What was done not cover the totality of what is. What was does not cover the totality of what is. So as the present cannot be confined in thought, its analysis of this moment is necessarily incomplete now. We don't assume, either like the relativists do, that we'll never get to the absolute truth. In dialogue, we don't set out on a particular road we believe will take us to the truth, nor do we give up on the truth as unattainable. We simply don't know. So we share all the roads, and we finally see that none of them matters. For all roads lead to the no road of unknowing. All roads are essentially the same, namely fixed and rigid, whereas truth is a living, changing thing that cannot be confined in a cage of knowledge. This approach to dialogue has not been common in society, although it is necessary if society is to cohere. If people generally could do this, our society would work differently. But that requires a sensitive awareness of all the clues and our responses to them, inside each one as well as in the group, verbally and non-verbally. To be sensitive is to sense the subtle differences and similarities. This is the foundation of perception. Sensitivity is not to see through the screen of thought, but to be aware of what is actually happening without identification or resistance. Sensitivity includes the senses and something beyond. The senses provide the information and then consciousness builds a form. Sensitivity is perception of meaning and the meaning holds the form together. Meaning is not static, however. As we share it, it flows among us and holds the group together. Then we can talk, think, and feel together coherently. This is a very broad vision of dialogue, but the principle might also be useful in more limited contexts, such as its application to corporate problems. That sort of dialogue will be limited because the people involved have a definite purpose. But even so, it might have considerable value as people come to know each other's disparate assumptions about structure, aims, and values. This kind of limited corporate dialogue can thus contain a germ of something different and more encompassing. After all, what's happening in business is a manifestation of the wider corrupt game affecting almost everyone, everything in society. Dialogue is concerned with the understanding and dissolution of this general corruption, whose root meaning is to break things up. It makes very little difference where or how this corruption manifests, whether in business, politics, science, religion, intimate relationships, or the mind itself. It's all one movement of incoherence and fragmentation. Dialogue is not only directed at solving social ills, however. We do have to solve those problems if we want to survive, but that is only the beginning. What we have to deal with is the transformation of consciousness individually and collectively, and whether this can be solved culturally and socially depends on dialogue. It is important that this transformation should happen collectively because one individual changing, critical as that is, has very little effect. Coming upon the sense of dynamic coherence in dialogue awakens intelligence and releases a new quality of energy with the potential to transform the individual and make a change in his relationship with nature, other people, and the cosmic dimension. Such energy has been called communion. The early Christians called it koinonia, the Greek root of which is to participate. That is, partaking of the whole by taking part in it. Not merely the whole group, but the whole. Dialogue, properly understood, is the way of this communion with life and consciousness as a whole, with the whole itself. People say that what we need is love or compassion. That's true, but we don't have it. How can we share? How can we love or feel with and for another when we are sure our views are right and those of another are not? We have to find a way to take it all in and see the relative significance of all these views that currently divide us and stand in the way of love. If we can communicate, we will have fellowship, participation, friendship, and compassion. That would be the way. The key question is whether we see that it's absolutely necessary, for then we will do something about it. By way of summary, dialogue from the Greek dialogos implies a sharing of meaning through the word. In dialogue, we explore and observe the hidden assumptions, values, and intentions that control our behavior. It facilitates group learning in a spirit of friendship. The essential cause of the crisis facing humanity is a pervasive incoherence in the process of thought, and dialogue is a way to understand how thought functions. Thought generally lacks self-awareness or proprioception, that is, for example, how it affects one's attitudes or participates in the making of reality. Dialogue serves as a mirror in which the content and structure of thought, The prejudices and patterns behind our thinking, feeling can be displayed and observed. Dialogue functions as a microcosm of the larger culture, of the relationship of individual and society. Thus, personal topics will be entwined with more general issues. No content is excluded. There is no specific goal or direction, no imposed consensus or attempt to avoid conflict. As people participate in the creation of a common pool of meaning, a shared content of consciousness emerges, which allows for a high level of creativity and insight. This brings about a sense of koinonia, communion, or impersonal fellowship. Dialogue is a conversation between equals. Any controlling authority will tend to hinder the free play of thought and the sharing of delicate feelings. Hierarchy and manipulation have no place in dialogue, and neither have conviction and persuasion, though some facilitation may be necessary. Dialogue is not a panacea. Not everyone will find it useful, nor will it be useful in all contexts. The spirit of dialogue is one of free play, a collective dance of the mind that becomes a continuing adventure, opening the way to significant and creative change. This approach to dialogue is something new, of vital importance for the future health of our culture and the very survival of mankind. Thank you so much for listening, if you have been till here. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading this and sharing it with you from this beautiful place in the peace that surrounds me. I'm truly grateful to be here at this point of time. Thank you so much, and I hope to be back again sharing more beautiful content for all of you conscious souls out there in your journey. Take care and have a beautifully peaceful day ahead, wherever you are.